Hello and welcome to the In the Beginning podcast. This week we spoke to Rie Sheridan Rose about her novel, The Marvelous Mechanical Man, and writing in the steampunk genre. If you missed last week's episode, you can find an introduction read by myself in episode 37. This week's episode is made possible by the wonderful people over at Shirts by Sarah. Head over to shirtsbysarah.com and find the shirt that tells your tale. So Marie, what did you think about the beginning of this story?
I loved it even before we listened to it. I'm a huge fan of steampunk, so she had me right at the cover.
Yeah, I love the aesthetic. I love the stories. We're going to get into it a little bit, like the influences behind them, but I was excited the second she submitted her story.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I will say that I thought Joe was a spunky, lead character.
Mm-hmm.
The professor, he's a little kooky, but in the first two chapters, there really wasn't much to him yet. And I wish I had read a little bit more so that we could get some of the robot in there. Because obviously, reading from the back, we know that the robot's coming.
Right.
So what did other people have to say about this story?
Well, Jackie said, cute steampunk story, deliberately reminiscent of dime store novels. I've read all 4 of this series, and so far, they're very enjoyable. Not overly violent. No graphic sex scenes. PG-13, more or less. Fun, lighter read. Likeable heroine, handsome love interest. Moderate steampunk details. This is my favorite of the 4 books. Miss Rose has done a nice job.
Jessica said, Phaeton was by far my favorite part of the whole story. Phaeton is the robot who's created by Professor Alistair and doesn't really become a character until about the middle of the book. I don't know exactly what it was that got me hooked on this character, but he's the reason I kept reading. She did have a couple cons in there, and one of them I will bring up is she said, there is a weird western thrown in this story that had nothing to do with anything. A girl named Calico Kate, whose best friend is a horse named Pecos, is upset when a bad man decides that he's going to steal away her pa's farm. At the end of almost every chapter, there is an additional page of Calico Kate's story, but it never connected to the main one. I know when I read it, these were in the beginning of the story, and at least within the first 2 chapters, Joe referenced the Garrett Goldthwait novel. So, as far as I could tell from the beginning of the story, it absolutely has something to do with Joe and how she interacts in her world. She's at least using this story as a reference point to how she's going to make a decision.
If I can agree with Jessica's review. I was a little bit baffled by it, but I was listening to you read it. Perhaps when I read the book myself.
Yeah, and you may have missed the part, but there is a spot where Joe actually references the Garrett Goldthwait novel, but she doesn't reference Calico Kate. She references Garrett Goldthwait, and you have to just remember that he's the one writing the novel. So the next review, what we got?
Fax says, this was such a fun read. The characters are very likable. Reading it feels like a lighthearted jaunt through Disney-esque Western setting. The villain was simple and underdeveloped, but I didn't mind because this book spent more time establishing the heroes and their relationship. I'm looking forward to seeing where things go in the next volume.
And generic Amazon customer, love when they don't name themselves. And I'm only bringing this up because I have a problem with the review. They gave it a 3-star review, and this was the whole review. A lighthearted, easy-to-read book. If you like clean, upbeat steampunk with a happy ending, you'll like this. I like Phaeton the robot, the best of all the characters, and I hope to see him in future episodes. To me, the 3 stars is an underrated rating for this story based on this review. Now, if it was Jessica's review, which Jessica gave it a 4-star, I believe, I could understand the 3-star because there was a con. If you're gonna give a book a con or a 3-star review, give a con on why. Because as far as I could tell, you like the book. You're hoping to read more. Mm-hmm. I'm hoping to read more. So I thought it'd be a nice part to put in, like a little bit of information on steampunk for some of our listeners that don't know what that is.
Steampunk is a genre that is heavily influenced by authors such as Jules Verne and H.G. Wells. These authors took futuristic machinery and brought it to a time it shouldn't be. Steam power was the power of the future and inspired the aesthetic we know today.
And right there, Jules Verne. That's what I was saying we were going to talk about later. In the Nautilus. I mean, that's one of the most impressive machines from like famous, not from an older
The
famous
famous
novel.
novel,
And
yeah.
if that's not what inspires the whole steampunk, I just remember even in the movies, like the steampunk, they're not the steampunk, but the steam powered aspect of it.
Mhm.
I always love that. I don't even know how to explain it, but it just gets in your mind and it just makes your imagination run wild.
No, and the fact that even the time period of Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, this is what they saw our time period being.
Yep.
That's incredible.
And this goes beyond books, as I just brought up movies. There's movies such as like Nine and Hugo that were heavily steampunk influenced, and even a video game. I mean, you see me and our kids playing video games all the time. I own both of these, Dishonored and BioShock. Dishonored, I mean, it's an adult game, so it's not for children. But that is so heavily influenced by steampunk. I'd have to say it's the number one game, even in a movie based on a steampunk. It is so steampunk. Even the masks, the way they wear their clothes, the aesthetic,
it's
everything.
Gorgeous.
It's
Absolutely
it's an
beautiful.
amazing game. We asked Rie Sheridan Rose what inspired her to write a novel in the steampunk setting. What was her favorite aspects of the steampunk genre?
I had been reading Gail Carriger's Parasol Protectorate, and I fell in love with her sensibilities and her steampunk style, which was very light and breezy and had a first-person narrative that I really wanted to try and emulate without copying. And I had never done a full-length first-person novel before, but this seemed like a good time to try it out. A friend of mine challenged me for NaNoWriMo to do steampunk. And I thought, that sounds like fun. And so I put those two challenges to myself together. And the rest, as they say, is history. My favorite aspect of steampunk is the gadgets. I absolutely adore gadgets. And I have been a Victorian at heart since I was a young girl. So it gives me a chance to bring all my favorite things together in one place, in one style, in one genre. And it's been so much fun. I have just had a blast doing the series, and I can't wait to do more.
So in her answer, she gives one of my favorite things, and I'm surprised that it hasn't come up before. It's it's NaNoWriMo. And what NaNoWriMo stands for is National Novel Writing Month. And there's actually a website, nanowrimo.org. And they believe that in the month of November, authors should write pantless, which we've talked about in earlier episodes. So I'm going to kind of tell you about them pantless. Okay, so starting November 1st all the way through midnight and November 30th, 11:59 on November 30th, you're to write pantless. You just write. The goal is to write 50,000 words in a month or more of a story, and they motivate you. The entire website. You create a profile, you write in it. People can look at it. People can inspire you. You win little badges for accomplishments that you've had, for goals that you've set for yourself. And it's not just myself that does it, Sheridan Rose that does it, or one of our past authors, Carmilla, also participates. Famous people have used it too. So like Erin Morgenstern, who wrote Night Circus. That was 3 years worth of NaNoWriMo. And she combined them all together and created, a book that's one of my favorites. Sarah Gruen, who wrote Water for Elephants. That was a NaNoWriMo. And finally, one of your favorite books, Wool, was a self-published NaNoWriMo.
I like the idea of being challenged to write and then being motivated by the people on the site. I think that would help many people get past their barriers in writing.
Mm-hmm.
We then asked Rie Sheridan Rose about research for The Marvelous Mechanical Man. Did anything come up that shocked her, gave her like one of those I never knew that moments?
Not really, because I didn't necessarily, and this is something that a lot of steampunk writers would frown upon, I didn't necessarily let facts get in my way. I wrote the story that I wanted to write, and if I was afraid something was going to be anachronistic, then I would look it up on usually just the internet to see what information I could find on the subject, or I would order books. I have a whole shelf full of books from everything from The New Empire to The Writer's Guide to Everyday Life in the 1800s to Complete Irish. I love books, and so I took any excuse I could get. And one of the things I found most interesting was a beta reader said, well, she went to this food cart and they didn't have those in New York in that time frame. And so I went back and found a website about food carts in New York where they had been actually in use since the 1600s. So it's amazing what you can find out with a little research, and how many things people think they know turn out to not be true. So that was something that I found very interesting. On the other hand, something that I wish I had had more research before writing the book was I had never ridden a train, which figures quite prominently later on in The Mechanical Man. And I had them doing all sorts of things that would be really difficult, if not totally impossible, to do on a train, because it's just not very sturdy and stable to try and walk around on a train, much less fight on the roof like they do in the old westerns.
So yeah, she had a story in mind when she wrote it. She didn't really worry about the facts. And I'm going to say this right here. As a story lover, I'm never stuck on facts. I know there's some people out there that are just fact Nazis and stuff, that everything has to be scientifically accurate. If it's a good story and it's got me, I'm good with it.
Well, and I like the way that she explains it, because her beta readers did find things. And the way that she justified it is, this is not a true New York City for the 1800s. It's her New York City for the 1800s.
But I will say, going back to the beta readers, I honestly, as I read it, when I was pre-reading it so I could prepare myself to speak it, I had the exact same critique about the food carts, you know, because I'm down in New York City, I'm picturing that stuff. And then to find out that there really was some, I wanted to kick myself in my own butt for having that critique, but it comes up. But I was able to read the story. It didn't stop me from reading the story.
No, and I love that she brought up beta readers, because they are a critical part to every writer.
And one of the main things that she brought up was a fight scene on a train. And spoiler, there's going to be a fight scene on a train. And how she wishes she had done that differently, because you can't physically do that stuff on a train. Who hasn't watched Indiana Jones and just been sucked into it and enjoyed every second of the train scenes? I mean, like I said, just read the book, enjoy the book, and shut up. That's mean Ben coming out today. That's as mean as I get. So The Marvelous Mechanical Man takes place in the 1800s. We asked Rie Sheridan Rose, what is the most difficult part about reinventing a historical period that is so well known?
The most difficult part about reinventing a historical period that's so well known is that people do expect certain things from the period. They expect that women would dress a certain way, that transportation would be a certain way. And if you try to be historically accurate, you need to worry about these things. I am not so concerned about being historically accurate as long as I get to tell my story. Now, I try not to be totally anachronistic about anything, I did check and see that, yes, there were diodes by that period, though they were called something else. That electric lights had started to go in New York City by the 1870s. But if there was something that wasn't necessarily invented yet, like phaeton, I didn't worry too much about it. I needed it for my story. It was important. And so that's why all the information about the Conman Chronicles has a tagline of "and a New York in the 1870s that never exactly was." Because I'm not claiming that it is totally accurate. I am claiming that this is my New York City in 1874.
So keeping enough historical detail allows an author to fudge the truth a bit, creating phaeton in the 1870s and have a story that still flows and is believable.
Absolutely. And we've already brought up Calico Kate and Garrett Goldthwait.
Mm-hmm.
I love the idea of combining the dime novel and the steampunk. And if you actually look at the steampunk history, steampunk came from the dime novel genre. It's part of that. So we asked Rie Sheridan Rose, with the dime novel's fast pace and storyline style, it seems the perfect complement for steampunk tale. Was this her experience, or was there a push and pull from the genres?
The dime novel was so much fun in the beginning. Calico Kate was a blast to write. I really loved it. In book 5, I have done away with the dime novels because it finally got to a point where it was so hard to come up with that secondary story at the same time, and I was getting feedback that people were skipping them anyway because they didn't understand why they were there. But in the beginning, I think they worked really well, and it helps to create a break in the series, because the first 4 novels, being set in New York City in 1874, are kind of a natural story arc, and they each have a dime novel. Book 5 is a complete break. It goes over to Ireland. It's a new year, and so I've decided that there's a new sensibility, and the dime novels have been tabled for now, though they may be brought back in other ways. I love that fast pace and trying to write a story that was similar in style as far as what was happening, but didn't exactly mirror the action in the real story, and that would be something that Jo would read and keep in mind and use as kind of a pattern for her life. Well, what would the heroine in this Garrett Goldthwait book do if she was in this situation? And it served her well for quite a while, but now she has different role models.
So I guess the feedback that she got from some of the reviewers has pushed her away from the dime novel.
Mm-hmm.
And I can understand that, as seeing a few of the reviewers, and even yourself, was a little lost in the dime novel. I don't see a problem in it. You know, some of my favorite stories have like 2-page poems in the middle that have nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
If I don't enjoy the poem, I just skip it. Sorry,
Well,
Dan Simmons.
Yeah, no, that's part of it. I mean, I'd probably skip it if she pulled all of the dime novel pieces out of the Marvelous Mechanical Man. I'd probably just read the dime novel itself.
Yeah, and another story that does this is The Watchmen. If you read the Watchmen comic book, there's a whole sub-story in there that really doesn't have anything to do with the story. It kind of does. You can make it.
Yeah, but
connect.
Even that, I ended up skipping all of that and reading just the Watchmen storyline and then going back and reading the comic book.
And it was worth it.
Yeah.
And as always, we asked our author what would you do type of question if you had known this. So we asked her, if you could send a message through one of Professor Khan's creations back to your early writing self, what would that message say?
Keep writing, no matter what else you're doing. Don't stop. Submit. Do it. Do it now. Because if I had started writing when I was first beginning to be a writer, which was when I was 12, and never stopped for most of my college years, and then afterwards I let rejection freeze me for another good 10, 15 years. I could be so much further along in my career than I am now, because I didn't actually start publishing anything until 2000. And that's not so long ago when you look at the entire span of my more than 18-year life. I really wish that I had never taken a break from writing, because even when I was a little kid, if somebody asked, what do you want to do? I said, oh, I want to be a detective. I want to be an actress. I want to be a ballerina. I want to be an archaeologist and a writer. It was always and a writer. And so I wish I hadn't taken such a long break, because I would probably be much further along in my career now and making a whole lot more money at it if I had not taken that break.
And she's absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
Keep writing, keep submitting, do it now, don't wait. Rejection froze her from continuing for years.
Oh, and it did for you too.
It still is right
Yeah.
now. I got that one letter from Amazon recommending a book that sounded like the one I was writing. I haven't been able to write since.
Yeah.
Thanks, Amazon. You know what? You could stay out of my word processor. I don't know how you do it, but you're starting to scare me. She does feel that she would be further along in her career if she had just stuck to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the best inspiration I'm going to get to start writing again this week. So just stick to it, guys. Get those manuscripts out there. The Marvelous Mechanical Man is available on Amazon. Learn more about this story and the sequels to this story at theconmanchronicles.com, and there will be a link in our show notes. Book 5 has just been released, just so you know. Remember to leave a review for this story and all the stories you read. Reviews are such an important way for you to support an author, and they only cost but a few moments of your time. In fact, reviews help podcasters as well. As a self-funded podcast, there really isn't money left over for advertising. Your reviews, your word of mouth, and love of books is what keeps Indie Beginning running. If you've enjoyed this show, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, or your preferred podcast platform. All reviews for this episode were taken from Amazon. Music found in this episode was written and performed by Jazar, entitled Look Inside. If you are an indie author and would like to hear your story featured on the Indie Beginning podcast, go to acmbooks.com/submit for more info. I am your host, Benjamin Frankie.
And I am Marie Kammerer Frankie, asking everyone to read more books
Be the best possible you.
and simply enjoy this wonderful life.
Thanks for listening. I changed the order there.
did.